Set 8 and Hero Augments have been live for a little bit now, but there's been a lot of criticism about this new mechanic and the way it can work. So let's go through some arguments and thoughts that the TFT community has had so far about this new mechanic to judge if this new mechanic is good or not. So the first criticism is that there is too much power in a single unit. And I think that the community really loves this sort of idea of having an all-in-one carry and unit. It's a great fantasy that has some really awesome situations, like turning your tank into a mech that tanks the entire enemy board but also one-shots the enemy backline. So I imagine this fantasy will continue being a thing in TFT like in set 7 with dragons and now set 8 with Hero Augments. But Hero Augments are a much healthier iteration of dragons. Rather than costing more gold, taking more team slots and just having larger damage numbers, Hero Augments transform the units in a much more creative way, and you actually have to invest in the unit via star level or by leveling. Dragons heavily favour the late game, whereas Hero Augments can enable all sorts of playstyles. Next up, we have the gap between low rolling and high rolling becomes even bigger. Right off the bat, let me correct this one because it's just not true. The gap is actually colossal. If you low roll your hero champion and someone high rolls theirs, they will be in a much better spot and they will have enough gold to push levels while you're still rolling and missing. This gap is exacerbated by Hero Augments as they can be extremely strong and powerful. And if you don't roll any good Hero Augments, then you may have to shift the direction of your board and pivot into something else. But this is where the skill expression comes in. Low rolling is nothing new in TFT, and knowing how to mitigate your losses is a very important skill. You should assess and judge what you should do based on your current board and augments and your opponent's boards. For example, if you're not in the position for a carry hero augment, then you should probably take the support augment, as you're guaranteed at least one support augment per roll, although the gap between a support and carry augment can be massive. The actual reason the gap is colossal is because of the increased damage to player HP. Generally, high rolling is much stronger in this set because you're dealing way more damage to people you beat, and low rolling is much worse because you're losing way more HP. Next up is you have to save the Augment Reroll for the Hero Augment. So whilst it may be ideal to get a Hero Augment that you're looking for or suits your board, again, this is where the skill expression lies with Hero Augments. In the case that you don't hit, are you able to pick a good backup Hero Augment and create a board around that? Of course, this may be less enjoyable as you may need to pivot your board, but this will give a lot of weight to your decisions. Knowing which lines you can take from each option and what the best option would be in your situation is a very powerful skill in TFT, and especially this set. You should consider if you should use a powerful carry augment or find a better carry with a support augment. But generally, when you're offered hero augments, your choices are to try re-rolling with a carry augment or center your board around this carry, use this carry through early and mid game but later swap out your carry for a more expensive unit like a Phelios. Likewise, you can do the same with support augments and drop them in the late game, or you could keep the support augment in your late game board. During hero augment selection, a lot of players pick augments for units that are either in their comp they're going for, or they play a unit that isn't in their ideal comp but they still fit and share the most important traits. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that hero augments are terrible at 2-1 because you're forced into comps from bad spots. Of course, there are situations, especially at 2-1, when you're offered hero augments that you are not in a good spot to take, and this will eventually happen to you. But being offered hero augments at 2-1 has to happen, as there are not any other opportunities to get hero augments for 1-cost units. To avoid the situation, you should scout to see which champions are uncontested so you have a decent chance of hitting later. But you are also guaranteed to get at least one support augment, so that's an out. Also, if you're aware of which reroll champions are meta, then you can pick off-meta carries that will likely be uncontested to make it easier to reroll for a particular comp. Doing this will help you learn all the different lines for all the different carries, and overall this will improve your flexibility as a player. People also say that being contested on your hero unit ruins your game. Scouting first is really important so you can avoid the situation and choose a different option or a support augment. But if you find yourself in this situation, you need to assess a few things. First of all, will you have a decent chance of 3-starring your hero even though you're contested? If you've got a 1 or 2 cost hero and there's only one other person contesting you, then your chances are decent, but if there's multiple people contesting you or the hero augment is of higher cost, then your chances are significantly lower. Then you should also consider when can you eventually drop this augment altogether. In some cases, a 2-star 4 cost is enough to replace your hero and their augment, so your playstyle could change from rerolling to leveling so you can find and hit a replacement unit. Thirdly, you should think about what board you can play where your hero will eventually become a secondary carry. Basically, the playstyle here is to hold copies of your hero to see if you can naturally get close to a 3-star, but if you don't, you'll push levels to look for a replacement. For example, let's say I've got Senna carry augment but I'm contested. I could field Severe to support and enable Senna, and then eventually replace Severe with Samira and move the items from Senna over to Samira. So now Senna will become your secondary carry. But I imagine this argument will continue to be said throughout the set. Next up, we have Hero Augments are not balanced. And I would argue that Hero Augments should not be balanced, as in Hero Augments should not grant the same amount of power to their respective champion. Let me explain. For a 1 cost to be a viable carry late game, they will need a lot more power than a 5 cost would. So understandably, the Hero Augments for lower cost units give a lot more power than they would for more expensive units. These powerful low cost carries still need to contend against the more expensive carries late game, whereas there's nothing else to keep 5 cost carries in check. If 5 cost carries were given the same amount of power as the cheaper carries, they would be completely broken. And this is also partially a perception thing. Let's take the Zoe augment as an example. Some games this augment will feel completely broken as you stun all their carries for 5 seconds, but some games this augment will be completely useless because they may have melee carries and the augment doesn't stun them. But overall, I think this is true. Some hero augments are just terrible, whilst others are completely insane. For example, I find Samira's style and flair to be very mediocre, as she gets 80% scaling from sure shots anyway, and the mana refund is conditional so it's not reliable. Starring up Samira is far more impactful so you can increase her base stats, and with those higher base stats, she would get more AD from the percent scaling. The Samira you gain from the augment is better than the buff Samira gets. Perhaps it'd be better if it gave flat AD that didn't scale with star level but did with percent AD. Anyway, compare style and flair to Taliyah's Stoneweaver. Stoneweaver is almost the equivalent of Giant Slayer, so a fully itemized Taliyah with this augment effectively has 4 items and can completely demolish boards. And Stoneweaver scales the power from Taliyah's traits. Star Guardian allows her to cast more often, and Spellslinger gives her ability power which directly boosts her ult's damage and gets scaled up by the damage multiplier. So there is certainly a discrepancy between the strength of hero augments even of the same cost, which is a balanced nightmare and will take time to overcome. Next we have I should only get hero augments for my board. Of course it sucks when you get hero augments for units that you're not playing and would be difficult to include in your board. But if that wasn't the case, then you would be able to easily manipulate hero augments to get the one you want, especially for 4 and 5 costs. This would be absolutely terrible for the health of the game. Just watch this clip from Leduc.
Because now, if tier 3 rules, I'm gonna get Riven or Jax and no Alistar. And this heavily increases my chances of getting Riven and Jax augments. So for example, here I know it's tier 3, tier 3, tier 3. So I already know if I press the reroll button, I know I'm gonna get the other Riven augment, I know I'm gonna get the other Jax augment. And the third one is going to be, I think the third one is either random or a threat again. So let's reroll and get ourselves Relentless Assault. Oh, it ended up rolling double threat. That was kind of dangerous, but still.
Let's say you have a board of 1 and 2 costs and it's hero augment selection. Would it be fair if you were offered augments for 1 and 2 costs, whilst everyone else got augments for 4 and 5 costs? Absolutely not, right? So while it can be annoying to be offered seemingly useless hero augments, the alternative of this would be absolutely terrible. Also, if every augment selection was perfectly tailored to your board, then you would easily run into situations where multiple people are playing the same units like Vi and Riven, and these people also get offered the same augments and take them. So in this case, players would regularly be contested on the same units from game to game, which gets stale very quickly. Now this is one I've noticed a lot. Rerolling hero augments to only get more hero augments for the same units feels terrible. Now this is a genuine problem that you will encounter in your games where both your first selection and your rerolled selection will be based on what your board was like last round. and because the augments will be for the same cost when you reroll, you may see the other augment for a unit you don't care about. The solution to this problem would introduce bigger problems, so this is unavoidable. If it was based on your current board, you'd easily be able to manipulate it like we saw before. Now we have some hero augments are boring. This is very subjective, but generally players will find some hero augments very disappointing, as not only are some just simple damage boosts to the unit, but also some of the units themselves can be very boring to play. So players will not want to pick some hero augments, and this is a very difficult balance to achieve between hero augments being viable and strong, but also fun. You'll probably see other boards with certain combinations that you've never had the chance of playing, but they look really fun. In this set, some possibilities are very rare, even something simple like zoomies with Nunu. Even when you've got the augment, sometimes you're not in the spot to play Nunu. But that's a sort of charm of this set. That one game where the stars align will be very, very memorable. People also say that hero augments are far too complicated. And this is sort of true. You may need some prerequisite knowledge to utilize a hero augment, be it where you want to get the most value or at least get some value. And because you may not encounter a specific augment often enough to learn from the games that you play, it may become necessary to find guides on how to play them in the future. Threats can make this even more complicated as they can be played on any board, so they have way more possibilities. The sheer number of hero augments can be very concerning, as it may take a lot of time to become familiar with all of them. But this isn't a massive issue because you're only offered 3 augments at a time and you only need to consider those 3. There could be 1,000 augments, but that doesn't really matter because all you need to do is think about 3 at a time. Finally, we have hero augments. Removing one actual augment choice makes augments overall less interesting. Now this is both good and bad. The power and opportunities that we've learned to expect as part of the game pace these last 2 sets just feels off now, and a lot of the hero augments don't quite match up to the power provided from regular augments. In previous sets, all 3 augments could scale off each other really well and would be really fun. But sometimes the scaling was obscene and some augment combinations were completely dominant, like getting triple cybernetic augments or triple trait related augments. So removing one actual augment greatly reduces the potential of some augment combinations, which is good for balance but bad for fun. And that covers most of the arguments. Hero augments clearly aren't perfect, and honestly I don't think they ever will be. And that's fine, because I'm having a lot of fun in their current state, and at the very least, if it's any consolation, hero augments will only be a part of set 8 and won't be a part of set 9. If you want to see more from me, check out my video on why the item reworks aren't quite good enough, and check out which champions I think will be in set 9. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.